Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Before we take a break from COVID-19 and talk a little bit about dueling congressional reports on the Russian collusion investigation and investigators, a couple calls real quick. Dawn in Crystal Lake, you're on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Dan, did I wake up this morning to hear you tell my daughter, who is general surgery chief resident at Emory in Atlanta, the major regional medical center for the Southeast.
Yeah.
Did I wake up to hear you tell her to go pound sand?
No, you did not. First of all, I don't know your daughter. Secondly, if you're referring to my commentary on the Tribune editorial, the portion where they said, and healthcare workers and first responders have done heroic and dangerous work treating those infected and containing the spread, I said, of course they have. I agree with that. What I don't agree with is that, put simply, stay-at-home works and the other junk science underlying the Tribune editorial. So I was telling our political elites, whether they're in public offices or in editorial boardrooms, to pound sand, not medical professionals.
Well, let me give you an update from Atlanta.
Okay.
Not only have I spoken with my daughter, but I have also spoken with persons in Emory who are in charge of the screening and testing of the MDs and the nurses and the respiratory therapists for infection. Because there is a problem with the doctors and the nurses and the respiratory therapists getting infected. It's happening and it's spreading through the hospital. If you end up putting the people who are currently up to their necks treating ICU patients, if you put them in their own ICU beds, there will be nobody to take care of them, and nobody will be taken care of in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So we need to protect the health and lives of those persons who are performing the most dangerous operations right now and the most critical procedures right now. You need to listen to them. Do you have all that nicely engineered, professionally engineered and manufactured PPE ready for her?
Thanks.
That I asked you to organize?
Thanks for the call, Dawn.
And Dawn, our prayers go out to your daughter. In Illinois, 2,500, we found out yesterday, doctors and nurses, medical professionals have COVID-19. 8 have died. That's throughout the state of Illinois.
Right.
So I don't know what the numbers are, but it's, they are our true heroes in this. They are our soldiers. They're on the front line.
So there's no question that healthcare professionals should be protected, and there's no question there's concern about that. That's not a question that anybody's asking. There's unanimity with respect to the answer to that question. The question is, what public policy choices does that implicate where there is concentration in particular areas, perhaps Atlanta, New York City, obviously, and a remarkable diffusion in wide swaths of the rest of the country? That's the question that we were discussing. It's not about who cares about doctors and nurses and protecting them and getting them the equipment they need to protect themselves while they're caring for patients. Nobody is arguing that. And frankly, it's a false argument to advance as a way, and I'm not saying Dawn is doing this, but this is what politicians are doing, as a way to deflect attention away from the difficult trade-offs that have to be made, a way to cover for the science they don't have to support draconian shutdown orders. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to abide that. I will be as empathetic and supportive as anybody else, certainly anybody else in public office, when it comes to those that are doing the work. And I'm going to be as vicious as anybody can be to those who are abrogating their work responsibilities, and I'm talking about people in public offices throughout the country and people in newsrooms and editorial board rooms. With that, we switch gears because there's been a lot of reporting on this over the last couple of days, and some of it's confusing with what appears to be competing reports from the House Intelligence Committee and now the Senate Intelligence Committee as to who did or didn't do what when it came to the Russian collusion investigation into Trump world. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by John Solomon, award-winning investigative journalist and founder of Just the News. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
So there was a lot of crowing in D.C. yesterday after the Senate Intelligence Committee report was released, suggesting that nobody at CIA did anything wrong. There was no use of spycraft to improperly surveil or investigate the president or his allies, and so all of the deep state stuff is just so much a right-wing hoax.
Yeah, listen, there are two competing political views in Washington that all now finally agree that the FBI did a horrific job in the Russia collusion case. They deceived the FISA court. They got improper FISA warrants. Now, everybody agrees on that. We didn't agree on that 2 years ago, but now there seems to be widespread agreement. So now the question turns to, did our intelligence community get the assessment right? And Senator Richard Burr, Senator Mark Warner, bipartisan leaders of the Senate Intelligence Committee, think the intelligence community got it right. Devin Nunes has a very different opinion. He thinks the intelligence community got a lot right. They got the fact that Russia hacked and bought Facebook ads and did other things to meddle in the election. But he thinks that they got the assessment that Russia was specifically trying to help Trump win and Hillary lose. They got that wrong. Well, what's happening is that these declassifications are starting to build a body of evidence that supports the Nunes theory. And why is that? We have documents that were released in the last 10 days that show now that the CIA and the FBI both knew, both were warned, both concluded that Russia had fed misinformation to Christopher Steele to create a derogatory, negative portrait of Donald Trump. If you're trying to help Donald Trump win, you wouldn't be feeding his opponent negative information that would potentially come out at the end of the election and harm his election chances or the beginning of his presidency. So the Devin Nunes theory is getting a lot more evidence to back it up, and I don't think this is something we're going to put aside. I think it's going to be a debate. I just talked to the top spy that the CIA had in Russia for many years, the station chief, Dan Hoffman. He is now saying for the first time the intelligence community got this wrong. So he's disagreeing with the Senate, and he's a career guy on the front lines who was undercover in Moscow for many years. So I think this debate's going to rage on, but that's what it pivots on, and this new evidence is beginning to change some of the debate about this.
Fred Fleitz, a CIA analyst, as you know, too, also disagrees with the Senate intelligence report and agrees that Nunes's report is more accurate. And then there's Andy McCarthy, who basically says the Senate intelligence report is irrelevant because I don't know what he basically said, I don't even know what even people are talking about. They're silent on all the questions that matter. The Senate intelligence report is actually just a big nothing burger.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a Johnny-come-lately. It was probably written months and months ago, and then it was probably put out as elements and components of the intelligence community worried about what this new information is saying as it emerges now in these declassifications. It's a classic way that the intelligence bureaucracy can try to muddle the picture a little bit in the face of some very difficult revelations. I mean, the truth of the matter is much of our intelligence community knew the Steele dossier was bad, and we're warning about it going all the way back to 2016, and warning about Steele going back to 2015. So, but now with that coming out, I think a lot of people want to find ways to deflect and blunt what's going to be a very raw and uncomfortable picture for our intelligence community. Listen, the CIA does great work most of the time. Mm-hmm. There's just been some bad intelligence work around this Russia case that just has to get cleaned up, and it will over time.
John, is there any new information about how the Christopher Steele's dossier was funded and paid for?
Well, we're pretty certain of that, right? We know that Hillary Clinton and the DNC routed money through their law firm to pay Fusion GPS, who then paid Christopher Steele. Not in any way in doubt. The real question now is, did the Russians know that? Did they learn that in the summer of 2016 and use that to their advantage to feed disinformation and sow discord in our elections? The new declassified information shows CIA began warning or had intelligence that Russia knew in July that Steele was doing this election project with the FBI, and they took advantage of it. They fed specifically false information aimed to hurt Donald Trump and fed it to Steele, and it got into his dossier, infected the FBI thing. Those are now public declassified revelations from our Intelligence Committee.
You wrote about something that is declassified but not yet public, and that's the transcripts of the 53 witnesses in the Russia collusion investigation. Why is it that we do not have those at this juncture?
Well, everybody was for this in September of 2018 for two reasons. Democrats thought that Mueller was going to drop a bombshell punch on Donald Trump, and Republicans thought they saw some exculpatory information. So in September of 2018, the House Intelligence Committee, Democrats, Republicans unanimously voted out these transcripts to be made public. They go through a declassification process. The world changes. All of a sudden, we find out that Robert Mueller's not going to charge President Trump, and that he concluded there was not collusion going on, and Democrats suddenly soured on the idea of these transcripts coming out. And so Adam Schiff, the new chairman, the Democrat, the top Democrat on the committee, he went to the office of the Director of National Intelligence and said, do not share any of these transcripts with Donald Trump or his lawyers, even if declassification requires the White House to review. Don't do it. And that stopped several of the transcripts from being declassified. And then the other 44, they gave Adam Schiff a long time ago, and he just decided not to release them, even though Congress voted them to be public. So what started as a bipartisan transparency effort ultimately dissolved into a political don't help Donald Trump effort.
Yeah, but Schiff eventually is going to have to release it, right?
He doesn't. No, the vote that was taken in an earlier Congress, and then when the new Congress came in, new sheriff in town, Adam Schiff could sit on these forever if he wanted. What I've done is filed a FOIA, and I'm trying to force the ODNI. Congress is not subject to FOIA, but the agency, the Director of National Intelligence, possesses these documents, made changes to them by declassifying them, and I've begun an effort to try to force them out through open records laws.
We'll look forward to those. And then also this from Lindsey Graham, a webpage that he stood up last week dedicated to the Senate Judiciary Committee's probe into the Crossfire Hurricane investigation of the Trump campaign. 4 Carter-Page FISA applications were recently further declassified, and he posted those. And among other things, and this can't be forgotten in this discussion, is speaking of the word collusion, the collusion between the Adam Schiffs of the world and the D.C. press corps. And one of the things we find in there, as was detailed in a good piece in The Federalist, is Adam Schiff's lying. Adam Schiff lying about what he knew versus what he said he knew, knowing that the D.C. press corps would pick up his version of events and dismiss Devin Nunes's version of events to try to advance the angle that Schiff and the House Democrats were playing. Regarding
I've seen that article, very good article, and it's really based on these declassified notes. If you go back now, remember, Devin Nunes put out one report saying no collusion and some bad work in the intelligence community, which we now know is true, certainly at the FBI. And then Adam Schiff came out with a counter report, which was Devin Nunes is wrong. There's no evidence that the Steele dossier was bad, and that there's no evidence that Russian disinformation was used to deceive this investigation. Most of what Adam Schiff put out in his counter report now is contradicted by the newly declassified evidence. Now, for 2.5 years, Adam Schiff got away with saying those things because this evidence remains secret. But I think if people go back now and do a timeline, this is what Adam Schiff said on this day, this day, this day, and here's what the CIA and the FBI knew on those dates and briefed to Congress, I think there's going to be a very glaring gap, and I think that's what the Federalist story was getting at.
All right, let me ask you to do a little soothsaying here from Attorney General Barr's interview. Yeah, Attorney General Barr's interview recently, where he said this was an interview with Hugh Hewitt, I think, is the interview in which he said this.
It was.
Where he said, look, there could be indictments before the November election because no candidate for office, no candidate for president is a target, and so it's not like it was in 2016.
Yeah, I've said this publicly on television and done a lot of reporting. There is the first real evidence in the last few weeks of activity that typically, criminal investigative activity that typically can lead to indictments or plea bargains. There's just things going on behind the scenes, witnesses being flipped, subpoenas and documents being secured under formal arrangements that suggest that there may be a small number of indictments when this is all done. I don't think it's going to be a large number. I don't think you're going to see a sweeping number of indictments, but you could see a number. I would predict that we might see a plea bargain from one or two people and then maybe a couple of indictments. One area where I'm seeing activity focused is on this question of the intelligence assessment. Was there political pressure to change the conclusions of the intelligence assessment to make it look worse for Trump? That's an area where the Justice Department and FBI appears to be working on right now.
What is the possibility that one of those individuals that could be indicted or participate in a plea bargain has a last name that rhymes with Homie or Menon?
I haven't seen a lot of focus on James Comey in this recent activity. I have seen some focus on the CIA and issues related around Brennan. I think it's too early to say whether Brennan's a target or a subject of the investigation, but there appears to be a focus on communications between the CIA and the FBI in late 2016, early 17, trying to determine, was the CIA telling the FBI one thing in private and then giving a different story in public? And that could be a very important thing. Sometimes people get tripped up not by the crimes they committed in the investigation, but in the cover-up. And one of the things I would not be surprised they're looking at is false testimony. Did somebody do something behind the scenes and then give a false statement or a false testimony in public? I'd keep an eye on that. I think that may be one of the focal points of this ongoing investigation.
And to keep an eye on all things related to this, make sure you read justthenews.com, John Solomon's site. John Solomon, award-winning investigative journalist and founder of Just the News. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Amy. Have a good day.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name,